Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and today's episode is proudly sponsored by Blaine Companies, Inc. They are a leading PR agency in Hollywood, and I often credit or blame, if you ask her, Devin Blaine, the dynamic CEO, for the reason my podcast now airs 3 times a week. Her introductions to extraordinary clients have enriched my show and expanded its reach, and the Blaine Group specializes in strategic communications across industries like entertainment, healthcare, and nonprofits. And you can learn more about their work at www.blainegroupinc.com, and that's spelled Blaine. So today I am excited to welcome one of the Blaine Group's clients, Gregory J. Leeson, and he is the author of Extraordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, A Path to Reconciliation in Our Divided Times. So join us as we explore his genuinely thought-provoking book, which delves into societal divisiveness through life stories of ordinary individuals who have faced extraordinary challenges. And to bring these narratives to life, he embarked on an ambitious 13-month journey across North America. He visited 63 cities and conducted in-depth interviews with 71 people. It's an amazing book. And the book features 66 compelling mini biographies that highlight themes of resilience, connection, and shared humanity. And he encourages readers to reflect on their own lives and relationships. Good morning, Gregory, and thank you for joining us today on Your Partner in Success Radio. And thank you for sharing the book to me. And before we get started, can you tell our audience, rather, a bit about you and how do you like to show up in the world?
Okay, first, Denise, thank you very much for having me today. It's a true honor. So, who am I? Well, I grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada, uh, and I grew up in a very highly responsible family. My mother was a homemaker, 2 older sisters, younger brother, and my father was an engineer, city planner at the telephone company. It was back in the days when he started a telephone company as a man in his 20s, and he retired from the telephone company. That doesn't really happen much anymore. But it meant we had a very, very stable upbringing. Never missed a paycheck. They had a good relationship. There's no alcoholism or anything like that. It was a great, stable environment. But the one thing that was missing from this environment is his father immigrated from England, and they were very stereotypically British. And so there wasn't a lot of affection or support and those types of things in our family. Uh, and, in 2018, I got a chance to get together with my brother and 2 sisters at the same time, which doesn't happen very often. And I asked them, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, as an adult, did you ever go back to either one of your parents and say the words, I love you? And they said, well, they never said it to us. And it was true. We never heard the word love. Not that they didn't, it just was never spoken. So it was a very stable upbringing that I had, but one that was very, very distant. And so, as me being me, I, as a young person, decided to reach out to other things. Uh, and when I was in grade 4, I remember several things happened. One of the most influential years of my life, actually. Uh, I stopped reading books. Sorry, I stopped reading fiction. And didn't mean I stopped reading books. The only fiction I read for the next 8 or 10 years of my life were those that were required by schools. But I started reading biographies of people, and in fact, virtually exclusively athletes or coaches. And those people became my mentors, my teachers, and I learned all sorts of things that I had no knowledge of within my family. And I thought, wow, these people live different lives. And so that was probably the very beginning of when I became interested in people's lives and so forth as a young child. I was heavily involved in athletics as a kid. Um, I actually had legitimate Olympic dreams as a distant runner before I made a huge mistake, won my last race, walked off the track, and never competed again. And I've always wondered why I did that. And I think part of the reason might have been, well, every boy always wants to please his father, right? And I never heard anything back. I mean, here I was, provincial champion, one of the best in the country, and so forth, and nothing ever came back. And so I just quit. But I played sports all the way through schools and so forth. And when I got to the university level, I wasn't good enough to compete at the university level, but I was a manager of the basketball team. And so sports was always a huge part of my life and all the things that you learn from sports. Uh, and when I graduated with a degree in economics, University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, I got involved in the investment banking business, and I had a few job offers and took the best one, I thought. And about a year later, I said, I want to go to Chicago and I want to trade in the futures exchange. And I had an idea as to what I would do with my life had I succeeded in that venture. Where if you're a successful trader, you can become rather wealthy. And I had things I wanted to do. And it wasn't really about money, but it was going to allow me to do the things that I wanted. Uh, well, I one day I quit, hopped on a plane, flew to Chicago, never been there in my life, didn't know a soul. And about a year later, after everything got worked out, I was on the floor trading. Well, that didn't last very long, but a year or so, and I lost everything. So I had to start life all over again. But I had met my wife asking for directions, actually, in Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And we started at the rock bottom. I did anyway. And but 4 years later, I met a gentleman who became my business partner, and I took up software development, completely self-taught, and made a very nice career out of running software. And then I got involved in project management and so on and stuff like that. And I retired from Big Pharma, Pfizer actually, in October of 21. So life kind of worked out, Denise, just kind of not how I expected it. And for a lot of reasons, I became a father very late. I was almost 45 when I was in China and adopted a daughter, my only child. She's over in France right now, living. And so that worked out as well. I became a father, which was one of my dreams. And I've had a chance to show my daughter the world. By the time she was 17, she'd probably been to about 25 countries. Um,
Oh,
after I
nice.
after I divorced, and my ex-wife allowed me to
Oh,
do that. I have a great relationship with my ex-wife. So, long story short, that's how I got here. And the day I retired, October 4th, my brother's birthday actually, 2021. About a week later, I had my website up and running for the project Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, and it was underway.
and I wanted to ask you,
Yep.
what was there a specific moment or experience that sparked the idea for this book? Because I mean, you sound like a pretty intrepid kind of guy. You just leap into things and go do it, and it works or it doesn't, and then you make it work or it doesn't. And I do the same thing. That's why I recognize that. But what was there a moment where you just said, I'm going to do this? And it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, in grade four, I started reading about people. I probably read more biographies than most people have probably read in a lifetime while I was a schoolboy. But the real impetus for this project came in July 2015. So I was the master of ceremonies at my high school reunion back in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and it was my 40th. So everybody knows how old I am now. And as the MC, I made sure I talked to as many people as I could that night. There were about 80, 85 of us there, I suppose. And I heard some great stories. And I thought to myself, I wonder if anybody has ever written a book just about ordinary people. And, I thought about it and I said, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm a numbers guy and so forth. I don't know anything about writing and I didn't have much talent at it and so forth. So I realized that was not going to ever happen. So I kind of dismissed it. Well, in 2019, as I mentioned, I'm divorced. In 2019, I was on a date and we were talking. And at some point during the conversation, she just interrupted me and said, Greg, have you ever thought about writing a book? I guess it was, about some of the experiences I've had and so forth. I said, well, I have, but it's not about me. It's about everyone else. And I told her the idea about writing this book about just ordinary people and what they've done and so forth. And she said, Greg, do it. Well, I never got a chance to see her again, but that Monday at work, I pulled a friend of mine aside and we went out for a walk. It was summertime, and I said to him, I said, I've got this crazy idea, and I told him about writing a book, interviewing people about their lives, and writing about them. And he said, "Wow, that sounds like a really neat idea, Greg. I think you should do it." And next thing I know, I'm learning Tada's story. So Tada is a PhD in chemistry from India. He had no plans of coming to the United States, but it just turned out that way. People who knew people and so forth, just a series of events. And he had this most interesting story. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do it. Well, next thing you know, COVID hit. So I'm working at home by myself for about 19 months or so, just dying, Denise. Oh my God, I was just dying. Oh,
See,
and
I actually enjoy, I hate to say this on the radio, but COVID didn't bother me none. I am a highly committed introvert. It
yeah,
just gave me one more reason to order my groceries and have them delivered.
there you go. Well,
It
for
didn't
me,
bother me, thank goodness, but I know it did impact a lot of
oh,
people.
it did. I mean, I loved going into the office to work every day. Um, I would have a difficult time in today's environment of working at home. I just can't do it very well. Anyway, I was there for 19 months until I retired, always thinking in the background about this idea. And say after I retired, within a week, I had my website up and running. And within a week, I knew exactly every city I was going to go to. I had planned my journey, and it was all on the website. Every city I was going to go to. Uh, I hit actually 53 cities, 39 states, 8 Canadian provinces, and it was all laid out within a week of retiring.
Yeah, and I'm looking in your book that's Eastern Journey, Western Journey, Southern
Yep.
Journey,
Yep.
and Great Plains Journey. I mean,
Mhm.
you were dead serious about this.
Oh yeah. Let me tell you how serious I was. You mentioned that I just leap into things and do things. Absolutely. And I think them through, but I will do it. When I decided to do this, I picked May 1st, 2022 as my first date to hit the road. Not a coincidence that was the day I turned 65. It was not a coincidence. I just symbolically wanted to do that. But Denise, the other thing I did is I rented my home for 13 months. I had no place to live for 13 months. So I had no choice but to do this. I
Gotcha.
couldn't back out. And so that's why I did that. And so as I said, I have a good relationship with my ex-wife. And so in between my 4 journeys, my ex-wife actually allowed me to stay with her for a fee, of course. And that's how it came about. But yeah, I just realized this is what I was going to do. So I rented my home, not to give myself a back door to get out of it.
Well, and that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you sound, and I read the book. I think I shared with you in the virtual green room. I interview a lot of authors, and I'm blessed to do so. And thank you, Devin Plain. But I have hundreds of books in this room, and every single book was gifted to me by
Hmm.
people like you. And I read the book, well, I glance through the book when it first arrives on my doorstep because it may be a couple months before I get you scheduled.
Yeah.
And then when I'm ready to review it, Amazon Goodreads, my blog, I sit down and I read it again. And by then it's gotten really fat with sticky notes. Then the weekend of, which was this past weekend, I start all over and I go from back to front, front to back. I read the whole thing. So I've read your book three and a half times, more
Uh,
or less. And I find these journeys fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And what I wanted to ask you is you traveled, as we just mentioned,
mhm.
extensively. So how many cities did you visit and how many miles did you cover? And how did you pay for this? You don't have to answer that last one. I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
So, so I'd say 53 cities, 39 states, 8 provinces, give or take 26,403 miles. And
Wow.
that is an exact number because I did the tachometer every time I left. And when I pulled into the driveway, I looked at it again. So I knew exactly how far I had driven. So yeah, it was quite a journey, journeys. Um, and I got to see everything, Denise. I mean, I could see the entire continent, and that was so great. Seeing the Rockies, seeing going from the desert into Texas, where it gradually turns green, was amazing. Western Pennsylvania, I remember, in the South, it was just terrific to see the continent like I did, and and meet so many great people.
Right. And one thing people may not know about Texas, because it's my next door state, if you're
Mhm.
planning on driving across it, it's 3 days.
Yeah,
Don't be in a
yeah,
hurry. It's going to take you at least 3 days, and that's driving all day long. So you traveled extensively while researching for the book, and we've talked about that, but how did so many people agree to share their stories publicly? And what were some of the reasons that others may opted out and said, no, I don't really want this public?
yeah. So what I did before I left on May 1st of 2022, I interviewed 5 people that I knew here in Illinois, and I posted them on my website, the mini stories, 550 words. And people might think, well, how do you tell a person's life story in 550 words? Well, the answer is you don't. What I tried to do is concentrate on some sort of theme that I got from that person, because the interviews, which I'll get to him in a minute, Dan McAdams. His interview process is about 22 questions, uh, and each interview took, on average, almost 3 hours. Some went over 6 hours. So there was a lot of material. And so try to condense 85 pages of Microsoft Word down to 550 words is impossible. But I picked a theme, and that's how I wrote about those people. So I had 5 stories posted to my website before I left. And so when I went out into the communities, and by the way, I gave about 19 speeches along the way at Rotary clubs mostly, but a few other places. And I met people that way. I met people on the street. I met people in so many different ways, Denise. But the fact that people could go to the website and actually read a few stories that I'd written, that is what got me going. And so my first person that I never met my entire life, I met in London, Ontario. It was my second stop. My first stop was Lansing, Michigan. No interviews there, but I actually got 2 out of London, Ontario. And I remember the first person I interviewed, an immigrant from Honduras, many years ago to Canada. And it's like, wow, I am learning a complete stranger's story about his life. And it was so cool. And so as I started posting these stories up and meeting people, they realized, oh yeah, he actually has interviewed people and people have talked to him and so forth. And so I think that helped. Now, of course, there's some people who just nope, not interested, of course. But the people that did, Denise, I interviewed 71. Only 5 declined to have their story published for their own reasons, and that's fine. Of the 71 that I interviewed, and this is in Dan McAdams' his book, the Northwestern professor who is one of the world's leaders in narrative psychology. He wrote that there would be tears in the telling. Of the 71 people I interviewed, mostly perfect strangers, 30 started to cry during the interview, Denise. That's how deep it is.
Oh, listen, I believe you. I've
Yeah.
actually, and this shocks me when it happens, but I've actually had people tear up a bit when they're telling their story on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had people say, Denise, I've never said anything like that on any other show.
Yep.
The audience, the host, I want to know you. I want to know who you are, what you're bringing to the table, why you do what you do.
Yep. I had several people, maybe 5, 6, 7 people say, Greg, I've never told anyone this before.
Right. I've heard
Um,
that too.
yep. I've hit it 7 or 8 times of the 71 people. It's like, wow. In my book, in Appendix A, Dan McAdams actually allowed me to publish his protocol. And I tell people, if you're thinking of buying the book, don't buy it for anything I wrote. Buy it for Appendix A, because that's where Dan McAdams' protocol is. It is the gem in the book because I believe everybody at some point in their life needs to reflect on those questions that McAdams asks. And he amazingly allowed me to reproduce it in his book. I had lunch with him about a year ago. He's only about 25 miles away from where I live here in Illinois at Northwestern University, and terrific guy. And I asked him, he said, "Sure, absolutely, Greg, go for it." And it was amazing they let me do that. But in that appendix, there's one testimony. I want to publish one testimony from the 71 people I interviewed, and it's Amy. And Amy was one of the criers, of course. And she tells me, she said, "Greg, I think about that interview all the time because I got off of my chest something I could never tell anybody." And it was unbelievably cathartic for her, and it's been cathartic for other people as well. It really
It
has.
it would have to be. And for those who are listening, he's talking about the interview protocol that is on page
Yeah.
198. So grab the book. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
grab the book. I highly recommend it. Um, Let me see if I understand correctly. Are you revisiting the people you wrote about?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's talk about that.
Let's talk.
What are
So
you
I
hoping to learn?
Well, I've already finished my Southern journey, and I got to see everybody except one person. He was away, and so I left the book with someone else. Him. I just want to complete the circle, I think, Denise. And so I'm doing three journeys. I'm combining four into three, and I'm visiting just the cities where I interviewed people, and moving on to the next city very quickly. So usually just I arrive in a city, the next day I see the person, and I leave the next day. So I'm doing that. I'm also giving speeches though at places where I spoke to before. A lot of them are having me back. I think all but one are having me back to speak again. So that's fantastic that I've been able to work that in. And as I say, for me, it's a chance to complete the journey in the way I look at things. And it's just been fantastic to see those people again and to stay with them in some cases, because some of them were my Airbnb hosts. I stayed at Airbnbs everywhere I went. And so get to see these people was amazing. I'll be getting my next journey to the West and the Great Plains. Basically, I'm combining. I begin that next month. And then in June, I start my Eastern journey, in which I will be the master of ceremonies again for my 50th high school reunion in Nova Scotia in July. So I will be home officially around July 24th, and then I will consider the project basically complete.
Well, and that, wow, I'm almost speechless. And Devin will tell you that never happens. Is there a sequel in the works? Are you going to write another book?
Yeah, I am.
All
But it's
right.
so I am actually moving to Portugal in October, and my daughter's moving there as well. She just wanted to make her life in Europe for whatever reason, and I just want someplace warm and so forth. And I've been considering this for a number of years, and so I'm moving to Portugal, and my next book is going to be based on Ukraine, a similar type of book about people's stories. I'm going to write a lot fewer than 66, though, and make them longer. And I also plan to do a picture book as well. I've already got a wonderful photographer lined up. She lives in British Columbia, but she takes pictures of people all over the world and has an amazing portfolio online. And I actually went to high school with her. I hadn't talked to her in 50 years. And I called her up and I said, "Hey, Mary, this is Greg Leeson calling from Illinois. Got a question for you. How'd you like to go to Ukraine with me?" Complete silence, of course. And then I explain.
I kind of went silent myself. Say what?
Yeah, after 50 years, what's going on? And I explained to her. Now, Mary's a real free spirit, and I explained the idea to her. I said, I want to bring the stories of the people of Ukraine uh, to the world, and also pictures as well. So a picture narrative book. And fingers crossed, I also want to do a documentary on this as well. So got big plans for that. And you asked me earlier, how I paid for this project.
You don't have to
100%.
answer that. That was
No,
me being very nosy.
no, that's okay. It was completely self-funded. It was just something I wanted to do. Um, how much money I made off of sales of the book never really concerned me. It'd be nice to make money on the book, obviously, but it was just something I wanted to do. But the next project, I'm going to approach in a much more commercial manner. And I think it can be after one book under the belt. It gives me credibility that I actually will follow through and do these things. And so I'll be looking for partners somewhere along the way for my Ukrainian project, which fingers crossed, we're looking at spring of 2026.
Very nice. Keep me posted. And
Yep.
listen, whenever you're ready, when this thing is published and you're ready, call me. We'll get you back on the show.
Oh, I will. Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, Greg, do you believe in second chances? My
Uh,
question actually is, did any of the stories you encountered during your research change your perspective on what you used to think of certain types of people or certain types of trauma? Maybe. I don't even know how to word it.
Yeah. So trauma is interesting because, as I said, I grew up in a very, very stable environment. And the trauma, if I suffered it, it was because there was just no affection and so forth. Well, I learned that in life. Obviously, I learned that. But there was nothing hard. There's no hard trauma that I experienced. However, when I interview people, I I was almost in disbelief. It's like, wait a minute, I read about these things, but are you telling me this is true that people lived through this and so forth? And there was some truly traumatic stories. Um, and maybe I was just very naive, but with my background, I could not relate to it. But I met people who had great backgrounds and so forth, but there were a fair number of people who shared trauma, which is why 30 of the people cried during the interview. And most of came out of very difficult parts of their life. Now, in terms of the different types of people I met, I approached this. I wanted to be as blank slate as possible. Uh, and I was going to interview anybody. I could care less where you were on the political spectrum, the sexual spectrum, anything. This were totally irrelevant to me. All I wanted to know was what your story was and how you got to where you are today. And there were some illuminating stories, let me tell you. Perhaps later on, we'll talk about some of them. But people I found were absolutely wonderful. I mean, I suppose a kind of person who's going to open up to a stranger about this, they're going to be open and warm people for the most part, and they were. So the people I got a chance to talk to were terrific. And again, it did not matter where you were. And I interviewed people from the far right to the far left. It was irrelevant to me.
Oh, listen, I'm with you on that. Unless you do or
Yeah,
say something that's going to damage me directly, I don't care.
yeah, that's right.
It's
Yep,
just none of my business. If you're a good person, a decent person, we're going to get
yep,
along just fine. If you're
yep,
not a good or a decent person, don't talk to me. I won't
right.
play in the sandbox with you.
Well, and that gets into the subtitle of my book. So, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives is a title. The subtitle is A Path to Reconciliation in Our Divided Times.
And that's
And
what I wanted to talk with you about because
yeah,
God knows these are divided times. And
they are.
and it's not just the United States, it's the entire globe. And I'll be
It
very frank
is.
with you, I think it's created. I think it's a created mess, but that's neither here nor there. But I watch and listen and I'm thinking, what happened to you? What happened to you?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's always in the back of my head. How did you wind up in this mess that you're in? Not me, them. I'm
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, yeah, we are in a divided time, and it's been coming for a while now. And
Yeah,
again,
I got,
true, it's worldwide. It's not just in this country. And as you read in my book, I captured 52 anonymous opinions on the question where I posed it. Some historians would say that the United States is as divided as it's been since the 1840s and 1850s. How divided do you think we are? And where do we go from here? What is the future? And I got 52 opinions on that. And I asked them to give me a scale, 1 to 10, one being everybody loves everybody, is kumbaya everywhere. 10 being, uh-oh, we're on some sort of verge of some sort of civil war. Well, the average came out to be a 7. So clearly people see division, uh, not civil war division, although there were a few people there. Uh, and so I got the 52 opinions, age groups, all age groups were included. And as I say, people see the country as being divided. And Dan McAdams's theory about narrative psychology is, people want to tell their stories and so forth. And if you listen to another person's story and actually learn who they are, you know what's going to happen? you are going to find yourself in some of those stories. Maybe not all, but you will find yourself, oh, that's me over there, and that's me over there too. And when that happens, Denise, those barriers between us, which are so high right now, with regards to communication, they start to crumble just a little bit. And that's all you need. And you can start conversations and get to know people. And when that happens, we can face problems, and we can reconcile. We can, solve things together. And I wish that some of our people in Washington and Ottawa and other places around the world would see things that way as well. But that was a purpose, is when you read people's stories, you're going to see yourself. And hopefully that encourages you to go to Appendix A and follow through on the questionnaire that's in the book.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you that because right now the big buzzword is racism wherever you
Yeah.
look. And I think it's been an overused trash word. But years ago, I had a guest on my show. This show is now 17 years old enough to drive or have a debutante ball. I haven't
Yeah.
figured it out yet. But he's from another country, Slovenia, I believe. And every once in a while, we'll jump on a Zoom call just to kind of catch up because he was a delightful guest. And he
Yeah.
mentioned that, and I live in the deep South, which he knew. And
Yeah.
he brought up racism. And I said, give me some examples. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I poked holes all over it. I said, listen, I live in the deep South. I don't know
Right.
what you are, where you're getting this from. It doesn't happen like that here. We get along just fine. Thank you very much. I mean, I never, maybe in New Orleans because there's a lot going on in that
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the state, we're fine. And I hate that the world sees Louisiana as a racist state. I'm here to tell you, we're not.
That's great to hear. And you're probably talking about, as you say, smaller communities, just everyday life. People get
Yeah,
along and so forth.
of course
Um,
we do.
yeah. Now it's interesting. As I mentioned to you, I started reading books in grade 4 about athletes, and of course, I read about many Black athletes, and who were brought up in the 1950s and 1960s, and it was a very different world for them in some ways. Of course, a lot of that has changed for the better, but it's interesting getting perspective to the lives of Blacks in the 1950s before the Civil Rights Act and so forth. Um, and it was, for me, it was a huge eye-opening experience. But as you say, when I was in the South, my journeys, 2 journeys now, I didn't see anything that led me to believe that Blacks and whites don't get along. I saw it all the time. Um,
Yeah, you're not going to see it down here, I promise you're not.
yeah, yeah.
I get
So,
really irritated when it's like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. Oh, shut up. Just don't even talk to me. If you
yeah,
don't know us, if you haven't spoken with us, if you haven't spent any time, and if you haven't had jambalaya or crawfish etouffee, you don't know what you're talking about. Go away.
right, right,
So
yeah.
I just don't play. But I do agree with you that once you start hearing other people's stories or reading their stories,
Yeah.
I like to hear them. I pick up more when I'm listening than when I'm reading. And
Oh,
like you, I've been
absolutely.
reading forever. I started reading at 3, and I
Wow.
was reading things. And when I was in grade school, I was reading Guy de Maupassant, and I was reading, you know, Edgar Allan Poe. I was reading
Yeah,
things that were way above my supposed reading level, but I
yeah,
learned a lot. And I was
yeah.
reading about Eisenhower and Churchill and
Mhm.
Napoleon. And recently I was reading about Lord Horatio Nelson. I didn't realize I'd
Mhm.
forgotten that he'd lost an arm. These things fascinate me, but when you have to go
Yeah,
back and you look at people as they really are,
yeah.
it's kind of like taking a squeegee to your eyeballs. You see things differently. It cleans up a lot of stuff, is my point.
Yes. And you mentioned some names there. Now, those are names everybody knows, right?
Right.
But who
They
knows?
should anyway.
Yeah, they should. But
Uh-huh.
who knows John Doe, right? Who's John Doe? Well, John Doe has a life as well. And his life and his experiences are interesting also, not just Churchill's, right? And so that's why it was all about ordinary people. Now, there were a few public figures in my book, but for the most part, mostly completely anonymous people.
And I noticed that. And out of all of the really incredible stories that you've shared in the book, do you have a favorite? Is there one that just stands out to you and that you just can't quite walk away from?
Yeah, so I get to ask that question all the time. And if you don't mind, I'll let you maybe relate a few, and then I
Oh
will
no,
get to
please do. Go,
and then
go,
I'll
go,
get
go.
to and of course the politically correct answer is I do not have a favorite, right? That's what I'm supposed
Yeah,
to
well,
say.
nobody believes that, so keep going.
Yeah, but there is one that I'll end up with, but there were a few. So I'll start with Joanne. So I met Joanne. This is a bit of a comedic one, I guess. I met Joanne in Palm Springs, and she was like 88, I believe, at the time, and just lost her husband. But it was a long, long, long love affair. New York City, both of them. He was a successful marketing executive. She was a former model, and she had her own business, travel business, and they were both dating someone else at the time. And when they just saw each other, that was it. You know, the other people, sorry. So they had a wonderful life together. But so she was in the travel business. They traveled a lot, and one year they found themselves in Jordan. And as I mentioned, Joanne was a former model, and so the sheikh that they met took a bit of a shine to Joanne. And so he approached the husband, of course, and offered not one, but two camels for her.
Camels. I remember
N-
that's got
Not
a
one,
sticky
Denise.
note. I know it's got a green sticky note on
Yep.
that.
And it wasn't just one camel, it was two camels. I mean, that's a great offer, right? And
Yeah.
and and so I wrote in the book after some deliberate consideration, he told us he turned down the sheikh because what the heck was he going to do with two camels in New York City, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Had it been goats, maybe, but camels, no.
camels.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it was a love story is what it was, a long-term love story. And I just have to always talk about that comedic event. You know, people have lives, and I heard some pretty funny things. That was one of the funniest with Joanne. Um, I mentioned Amy before. Her story is in there also. That's one whose testimony she is in the book. Well, Amy was going through a divorce on the East Coast, and highly abusive husband, two boys, one that was autistic, the older one, and he was starting to become a little bit physical. And she's a very, very petite woman. And she thought that she was in danger. And so when the judge asked her at one point during the trial, he said, if I grant you full custody of your two boys, will you follow through and move to California as you've indicated you're going to do, or will you stay here? She told the owner, Your Honor, I have to move. Just like that, she completely lost all custody of the boys. And she moved to California and made a new life out there. But she could never tell anybody what had happened. How does a woman in her mid 30s or so tell her girlfriends or whatever that she was meeting, oh, yeah, I left my two sons behind? Well, she couldn't. So she never talked about it. I was the first person she ever talked to about what had happened. And it, as I said, it was unbelievably cathartic for her. And she was able to open up and talk to people about her life and what had happened and so forth. Um, and that's another story, very dramatic. She came from a broken home to some extent. Her mother was married four times. Um, and so it was a revolving door with men, and it was that kind of environment. And she said at one point, it got so bad that she had forgotten when she moved to California that she had a master's degree in accounting. It took her mother to remind her in a conversation, you can get a job. You've got a master's degree. I what? She couldn't even remember it. So it was very traumatic for her. Uh, but Amy was an amazing story. I met her in the street in Seattle. She was there for a job interview, and we talked for a bit, and then left, and then we bumped into each other again, started talking in more detail, and she said, "Listen, I'm going to be back in Los Angeles in 2 weeks' time." I said, "I'm going to be there." So we made an arrangement to meet for an interview in Seattle, and we met 2 weeks later in Los Angeles. Um, Let's see, who else do I meet? Oh, I was in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, and I walk into the famous Civil Rights Museum, right? And when I walk in, I meet the docent and I, mention what I'm doing and so forth. He said, "Oh, you have got to talk to that man back there. He was just about to give a talk." And it was Hezekiah Watkins. And I did not know the name. Hezekiah Watkins was the youngest freedom rider who went to prison in Mississippi. He was 14 years old at the time. And he just happened, 1961, he happened to walk into the wrong place at the wrong time and with the wrong skin color. And he was arrested and thrown into an infamous prison in Mississippi. And it took a phone call from JFK to the governor of Mississippi, who was a Democrat, to get him out. And his story, I mean, he knew all the people. Hezekiah knew Jesse Jackson and everyone else involved with that movement. And I got a chance to firsthand talk to someone involved with that movement, which was pretty amazing. Uh, let's see, I've got two others. Let me just pick one other one here for you. Oh, oh yeah. So I met Raja in London, Ontario. He was the second person who I never met, who I interviewed, and he was the son of a immigrants actually. His father was a very successful real estate man, and so Raja kind of followed in his father's footsteps. And but he never really got along with his father. Just didn't see it eye to eye, and Raja took over more and more responsibilities, and never really felt he was being compensated the way he should have been. Although, as a young man, he had six figures in his bank and so forth, drove a nice car, and the whole works. He was making a lot of money. And when he turned 30, he basically said goodbye. And he just left, dropped everything. He could have been a very wealthy man. He said, "I spent the next 6 years of my life playing volleyball." Uh, Raja walked away from his money. And today you will find Raja half the time, he spends half the time in the United States with his girlfriend, touring, mostly in the South in the wintertime, cleaning parks. He just goes out and cleans parks. That's what he does. And he lives off of what he has. So he lives a bit of a subsistence life. They travel in a van where they sleep in and so forth. But he just walked away from his money. Just before the American Thanksgiving in 2022, I interviewed him in May of 22. I get a phone call or an email, I forget. He says, "Hey, Greg, do you still have the audio of that interview?" Um, I said, "Yeah, of course." He said, "Can you put it out there for me along with the text document so I can pick up?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." Didn't know why. I find out about a week later or so. His father took his own life, and
Oh, no.
Raja never reconciled with him. And there's a clear lesson there, right? The lesson is, and I tell people this when I give speeches, if you have some words that have not been said, say them, because you never know when you're never going to get a chance to say them. And that was Raja's fate. He never got a chance to reconcile with his father. Um, an amazing guy in a lot of ways too, believe me. Very, very much out there. uh, but the last one I'll tell you, and if I had a favorite, this would be it. So my Airbnb host in Manchester, New Hampshire. Uh, so he's not there at the time that I arrived, but he says, here the keys are in the mailbox and so forth. Go in and make yourself at home. So I'm in Manchester and I drive outside of Manchester on the main highway. I get onto the secondary highway. I get onto a tertiary road, and next thing I know, I'm on a dirt road in the woods trying to find his home. And I drive up to it and I look around and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is another movie, Deliverance. Uh, anyway, so I go to try to find the keys. I can't find the keys. There's no mailbox that I could find. So I start to turn around and drive away, wondering, what is this? And he's a big burly guy with a black beard, blue collar worker. So I had certain images here, right, going through my mind. Anyway, on the way out, I find an Amazon driver, and I talked to the Amazon driver, and she's kind of new. But a guy comes out of the house. It's actually an area for kids for the summer, and he says, "What's going on?" And I explain. He says, "Oh, I know the home. The guy's kind of new here, but you'll find the mailbox on the side of the road." Oh, okay. So I found the keys, got in, and so forth. Well, it turns out this guy is just an amazing, wonderful human being. He's 29, the youngest person I interviewed. And I went into the interview. I made a mistake, Denise. I thought what I was going to hear. I said, "Oh, I probably know what I'm going to hear." Well, I got blown away. So he was born into, let's say, an unfortunate family. He had an older brother, about 2 years older, and his father had an much older son from a previous relationship. But his father was an alcoholic. His mother was a drug addict. Oh, sorry, the other way around. Uh, and one day, the oldest son killed his father. And so the oldest son is gone to jail. The father is gone. And the alcoholic mother now has these two boys, Dan, who's 5, and his brother, who's 7. Well, it didn't take family services very long to come and take them
No,
away.
I wouldn't
Yep,
think.
yep. And put them into a foster home. Well, the foster home was probably worse. They
I
had
was just
7,
going to say, I've been around, we've had some foster homes here where I
yeah,
live. They're not good.
not good. They
They're
had
not.
seven kids in New Hampshire, or it might have been Connecticut at that time, and there's no way they could take care of 7 kids. He said the man of the house was good, but the mother was just an absolute nightmare. All she wanted was the money. And he said, I spent 5 years basically trying to avoid them as much as I could. Well, he's 10 years old. He's in grade 4, reading at a grade 1 level when these two angels come along and adopt Dan and his brother. By the end of that school year, Dan is reading at a grade 6 level. His mother was a teacher. Well, they wind up going down to Florida for high school, and they enroll Dan in this really posh prep school, not really Dan's thing, right? But one of the teachers there, a chemistry teacher, uh, saw a lot of promise in Dan and went out and got Dan a full ride, 4 years at one of the major schools in Florida, right? You see, Dan was a star athlete. He was a 4.0 student and a classical pianist. Now, when you see Dan at age 10 in this horrible situation, reading at a grade 1 level, was it grade 4, you just know where he is going to go, right?
Pretty much. And I think
Pretty
you
much.
tagged it, properly, angels.
Yep, exactly. And so what I envisioned him here, I'm sitting across the table from this big burly guy, black beard, heavy machinery operator, and so forth, because he turned down the scholarship at the university. And he went and got his license to operate heavy machinery because all he wanted in his life, Denise, was to get married as soon as he could so that he could have kids. That's what he wanted in his
Mm.
life. So he turned down 4 years because he knew he wouldn't be making money for God knows how much longer. And has nice home in the woods in New Hampshire. He is engaged now, which I'm very happy to say. But I prejudged what I thought I was going to hear, and I heard absolutely nothing what came out. And it's like, who knew how much ability and talent this guy had at age 10? Nobody. So if I had to pick one, that would be it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And my next, I'm wiping my eyes. My next question is, writing this book must have been an emotional journey for you, and you just kind of proved that. So what surprised or moved you the most during the process of gathering these stories outside of him and putting them together?
Now, that's another interesting question. I've been asked that before. And of course, as you can imagine, before I went into this, I had some idea as to the type of people I might meet. Obviously, I was going to meet people who are open to these kinds of things, right? Um, and I had an idea that I was going to hear some great, great, great stories. And I did. So that did not surprise me at all that I heard these wonderful, diverse stories. Uh, and so I tell people, you know, I kind of got out of it what I thought I was going to get out of it, which, and I'm sure it changed me in some ways. Yeah, I've always been a reflective kind of person in life, as you can probably imagine. Um, and and I'm not sure how it changed me, to be honest with you, other than the fact that it reinforced some of my fundamental beliefs that people are really great when you get to know them, and everybody has a story. Those stories are important, and they are very, very rich. So people ask me how it's changed me, and I have a difficulty answering that question. I'm not sure it so much did, but it did reinforce a lot of the things that I believe when I went into it. Now, again, as I mentioned about Dan, I misjudged Dan completely, and that was one of my earlier interviews. And I promised myself I would never do that again with anybody, regardless of who was across the table. And I don't think I did. Uh, but it was for me, it was a great experience. I learned so much from so many people, I suppose, little things. Um, and, I would never hesitate to do this again. As I said, I'm already planning one in Ukraine next, which was not on the agenda, by the way. This was a one-time deal when I started this. There was no way I was ever going to do another book again, but it looks like I am. So maybe it did affect me that way too.
Well, yeah, obviously it did.
Yeah.
When you started talking about Dan, I wrote because I write a lot while I'm listening to my guests, and I wrote down
Okay.
that old tried and true saw stereotypes exist for a reason, but you're knocking holes in that.
Well, Dan certainly did, absolutely, and you're right. I tried to go, as I said, I tried to go in with a blank slate. When I sat down with people, and for Dan, the physical appearance, I knew what his job was, I knew how young he was, and so I had these pre uh, conditions or knowledge, and I was so wrong. I was so wrong. Um, but with the other people, most of the people I interviewed were much older. I think the average age was probably easily 50 plus, maybe probably close to 60. I actually never did the math, but it's probably close to 60, the average age. So people who've lived a long time and had some experiences. And like I say, Dan was the youngest at age 29. So I made a mistake on that one.
I find him fascinating.
Yeah,
Greg,
he is.
what do you hope readers are going to take away from ordinary people, excuse me, extraordinary lives? Is there one key message or feeling that you want them to walk away with?
Yeah, the key message, the key feeling is that when you read about other people, especially in these divided times, you realize that you have so much more in common than you had that is what is different. We all live in many ways the same themes. They're slightly different, of course, but there's so many themes that are similar, where there's life, death, abuse, overcoming trauma, or whatever. So many of us have these things. And so when you realize that other people are living the same things that you are in some ways, uh, as I said, it perhaps can make you a better person and more open and willing to listen to other people and who they are and what their experiences are, and encourage conversation. And as I said, lastly, to look at that Appendix A and look at that questionnaire from Dan McAdams and actually do it for yourself, or have someone interview you that you trust, or you could do it yourself and start writing your own story. I think it's something at some point, as I said earlier, we all need to do. And
We do. We
we
don't
do.
know our own story. We really
We
don't. I mean, I'll give
we
you a quick example. My brother passed away about 3 years ago. He was a double lung transplant recipient,
mhm,
and he lived an extra 8 years, but that final year was just
yeah,
hell for him.
yeah,
And among the family, we had talked about, there was going to come a point where he wasn't willing to keep struggling and
yeah.
being in such incredible pain. And he made it known because he had to start dialysis later on. And he said, if you ever hear me say I didn't go to dialysis today, I'm done. And I got that text. He said, I didn't go to dialysis today.
mm,
And I called him and I said, can I record this? Because I knew he
yeah,
only
yeah,
had a matter of days, literally.
yeah.
And I knew that, I may be able to talk to him the next day, but it was unlikely. And we talked about everything. We cried. We said, I'm
Wow.
sorry. We said, I love you. We said,
Yeah.
I didn't hear that. I didn't see it that way. And he would bring up things that I was like, I was standing right next to you. That's not what I saw. So, yeah, and you mentioned it earlier. Take those moments to say, I love you, or
Yeah.
thank you, or
Yeah.
goodbye, because you will be
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk one more thing about my father. So as I said, we never heard these words from either my father or my mother, I love you and so forth. Never, never happened. And that's just not me. That's my three siblings speaking as well. Well, after I'd moved to Chicago, I got a phone call about my father who had bypass operation and he was in the hospital and he was, quote, not doing well. And so I jumped on the next plane, went back and went into the hospital and it was just my father and me. And I was saying to myself, you've got to say it. You've got to say it. You've got to say it. And I finally did. I said, Dad, I want to let you know something. I love you.
Hmm.
And when I told my three siblings this reaction, they looked at me like I had just stepped off a spaceship from Mars. What are you talking about? That was his reaction. I said, yeah, that was his reaction. My stoic Englishman dad started to cry in a public place, right? And
And there was no more opportunity, and he knew it.
yep, he realized that he couldn't say the words. Now he recovered from that and lived many years after that, but uh, he couldn't say the words, and he never did. And
Hmm.
but it was the most difficult thing for me to do to say that to my father because that was something that we never did in our family. And I realized at that point, or not at that point, I probably realized a little bit after that. I said, "Oh, I get it now. All of us have our limitations as to what we can and cannot do." And my father simply couldn't say those words. Now, when I told my mother, she said it back to me, right? My father couldn't. And I understood that we have these limitations as human beings, and all we can do is forgive and let let it let it go.
Try
And
to
that's what
understand.
I do understand. There you go.
Yeah, you have to
And
try to understand. And if you can't understand, you do have to let it go because it will drive
let it go.
you nuts.
Absolutely. And I think I released myself in a way that I know for a fact my three siblings never did. Even when I talk to them to this day, there's some, you know, bitterness about that and so forth. But for me, I was lucky. I learned how to do that. And again, it's a way of learning from other people. And that's what I learned from my father.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Greg, thank you so much for sharing your fascinating, really fascinating journey and your insights with us today. But before we wrap up,
Yeah.
do you have any final thoughts or messages you'd like to leave with our audience? And where can they find more about your work and connect with you?
Yes, I was just going to say yes. So I have a website. It's gregoryleesonbooks.com, and Leeson is spelled Leeson. So gregoryleesonbooks.com is the best way to connect, see what I'm doing, what I'm working on, and so forth. I am on Facebook, of course, but I don't do a lot of social media, but I am on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and I have my website. Most of the best information will be on my website, and you can order the book from there if you're interested as well.
Wonderful. Well, listen to our audience. We had the privilege of hosting Gregory J. Leeson. He is the author of Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, A Path to Reconciliation in Our Divided Times. And he shared his inspiring journey of traveling across North America, where he gathered stories of ordinary individuals who have faced extraordinary challenges. And his book offers a powerful exploration of resilience. We're using that word a lot, and connection in divided times. So if you're inspired by Greg's story, visit his website at gregoryleesonbooks.com to learn more about his book and his upcoming projects. And you can also connect with him on, I'd say LinkedIn would be the best place.
Yeah, there
So,
you go.
yeah, yeah. Don't forget to tune in next week for more inspiring conversations on your partner in Success Radio. And Gregory, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Denise.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.